All right. Well, Stratton, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Just a little background information for those of you that may not have seen our blog or maybe our Instagram post, but it is on the website. I actually toured the Liberty Tire Recycling Facility in Port St. Lucie 2 months ago, I believe. It kind of all blurs together, timeline. But just a few months ago, and I had such a great time really learning all about the recycling and tire recycling that goes on not only in Florida, but also throughout North America. Liberty Tire Recycling, I learned actually recycles 2/3 of all tires throughout the US. So I just think that that is amazing, and they're doing a lot of different, making a lot of different products and doing a lot of different things with it. Um, so Stratton very kindly offered to do a presentation for us so we could all learn a little bit more about what Liberty Tire is doing, as well as how we can work with them in the future. So I will go ahead and let Stratton take over.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm going to address some of this in my presentation, but one thing I want to start off with is I always like to say tire recycling, is sort of one of the greatest recycling stories in the US ever told. And that can sort of feel like contrast to people's experience because I grew up in the panhandle of Florida and I very distinctly remember my best friend's house had an illegal tire dump in like a clearing in the woods next to it. So I grew up playing in illegal tire dumps. So how can you recycle so many tires? We, as a company, recycle 81% of the tires. The industry rate is a little lower, but I think it's still 79%. So if you think about all the time, effort, and ink that's spilled over plastic recycling, which hovers around 10 or 11%, we're miles above that. But we still see a lot of tires out there, and that's because 80% roughly are recycled, 17% go to landfill, and then there's 3% where there's a question mark. Now, that whole 3% probably isn't being dumped illegally or stored illegally, but some portion of that is. And one of the things I always like to tell people about the why it's so important in the US is we produce one scrap tire per person per year, which means 300 million tires coming off the road every single year. So more than 20 million in Florida alone. So even if only 1 or 2% of those tires aren't ending up in the right place, that's still a lot of tires. So my presentation is roughly going to be broken down between sort of what's the state of tire recycling, what are some policies we can put in place to get more tires to legal destinations, ideally recycling, but at the very least disposal if not recycling, and then what are some of the markets that tires currently go into. And I've been told to take as long as I need, but I think that's a dangerous proposition. So I am going to try to stop myself after 20 or 25 minutes. And I will say, if people have any burning questions that you don't want to wait until the end, just like come off mute and interrupt me. I'm more than happy to take them as we go. Okay. So, Sherry covered this a little bit, but who is Liberty? We're the only coast to coast tire recycling company in the US. That means we collect tires from retailers, transfer stations, landfills. We process them, and most processing in the US is just a manual shredding and granulation process. We do have some processing that's done by freezing tires, but that's a very small portion compared to the granulation process. And then we also produce our own products and supply rubber as a feedstock for other manufacturing.
Hey,
So yeah.
Stratton, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Is there a way to just make it so it's the
Oh,
right
I
now?
see. You're seeing the black screen.
Yeah, that way we
Okay.
can the smaller text people can read it a little better.
Yes. Let me see. Let's try this again.
Thank
Do,
you.
do, do, do. See if I can get it not in presenter mode. And no, full screen. Display settings. There we go. Let's see. Is that better?
Yeah, that did
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Perfect.
All
Thank
right.
you.
So we also manufacture our own products, and rubber, as we'll get into it, can be used in everything from infrastructure, mulch for landscaping, mulch and poured in place for playgrounds, but also as a feedstock for manufactured goods. So if you've ever been to a commercial gym or a hotel gym, the rubber flooring, rubber tiles, edging for gardens, basically anything that has sort of filler material in it can be replaced by a recycled rubber product. So who am I? I'm a native of North Florida. I actually grew up in a family that was all involved in the solid waste industry. My grandfather ran a landfill in Volusia County, and I went to Stetson, so I worked there when I went to college. And I actually remember not knowing why at the time. One of my jobs was inspecting the vehicles coming in to make sure that tires weren't going in because they are not allowed in their whole form in landfills. So I spent 20 years working in politics and advocacy with a focus on sustainability. And then I was a consultant for the industry before about 2 years ago. I moved in house to cover government relations and communications for Liberty Tire. Why does it matter? So I live in Maryland on the border of Washington, D.C., next to the Potomac. So these are all pictures from within, 5 minutes of my house. Tires are ubiquitous, they're durable, and they're difficult. So ubiquitous. I already mentioned we produce more than 300 million scrap tires every single year. It's very hard for me to go anywhere without seeing scrap tires somewhere. On the left, my wife, I sure greatly appreciated this. We took a hot air balloon ride in rural Maryland. And as we were riding over the countryside, I spotted an illegal tire dump and took a picture from the hot air balloon. In the middle is down on the Potomac, which the point here isn't that there's a picture. It's I went to this tire that you can see smack dab there in the middle. You can see you can tell it's old because it has the white sidewall, but I actually went up and got the DOT code on it. And that tire still has its sidewall, still has its tread, is still in its whole form, and it was last manufactured in 1971. So tires are durable, which we love when they're on our car, but left to their own devices, they're not going to break down, and that's a problem. And then tires are difficult. Again, I'm sure somebody would appreciate this, but my office looks out over my neighborhood, and one of my neighbors actually uses a tire as a piece of exercise equipment because they're so bulky and heavy. All of these things make them difficult to manage as a product, let alone recycling a product. So a little bit of level setting on where we are. The reason tire recycling became a thing was because ultimately, at the end of the day, it might surprise you that landfills just do not want tires in them. They definitely don't want whole tires in them because whole tires, we call it, they're donut shaped. They capture methane, which means you can't control them. They will capture methane in a landfill and float to the top. So they're both difficult to, control in a landfill. They also mean they'll break seals over time. And so where tires are allowed to be disposed in landfills, including in Florida, there are normally minimums for shredding them first. But because landfills didn't want them, back before tire laws came into place in the late 80s and 90s, we had more than 1 billion tires on the ground in the US, which is why if you go back and Google tire fires, which still unfortunately happen today, but in the 1980s, they were very, very common. And, we're talking fires where 7 million tires, 10 million tires, 20 million tires were catching on fire. And there's one that happened near me in Virginia, in Winchester, Virginia, where it took 6 months for that fire to stop burning. And it took 20 years to remediate the site. Because the good news on tires is they do have chemicals in them, but they're not released unless that tire is broken down. But a fire is a really good way to break down that process. So the good news is we have less than 50 million tires on the ground today after states have mostly implemented. 97% of tires are managed, which means we know where they come from and where they go to. Although, as I mentioned, only 80% of those are recycled. And we have 44 states with disposal rules. Disposal rules basically in this instance mean you can't just throw a tire into a landfill. At the very minimum, it has to be shredded. Depending on the state rules, some don't allow it to be put into a landfill at all. And that makes tires actually the second highest recycled product in the US, only behind lead acid batteries. So you might hear all that and say, but I see tires all the time. And this is true. Unfortunately, every single picture on this slide is from Florida. The one on the left is from a processor who was, let's say, operating very poorly and abandoned their site. The one in the middle is from an illegal hauler. And the one on the right, we don't know, probably from an illegal hauler too. And that Facebook post was sent to me by my mother and her friends who like to ride horses in the national forest. So everybody knows to come back to me to complain about illegal tire dumps. So what can we do to get fewer of these tires being dumped illegally and more into the recycling stream? Um, so tires in the US are managed primarily by the states. There's oversight from the federal government around safety, particularly around chemical safety, which I'll get into later. But there's essentially four different models, really three, because EPR for tires is only just now being implemented in Connecticut. But it's market-based system where the state charges a fee, Florida charges a dollar. Market-based system where they don't charge a fee, they just manage it from general funds, and then a hybrid system where the counties sit in the middle. Florida's a free market system, and the only thing I really want to emphasize here is as a consumer, if you go and get your tires changed, you're probably going to see two fees on there. State fee, sometimes called an eco fee or disposal fee of $1, and then a private disposal fee. The important thing to know is, I think this is true, in almost every state, the disposal fee that the states charge, none of that money, maybe with the exception of two states, none of that money actually goes back to tire recyclers. That money, in a best case scenario, is used to pay for enforcement, pay for administration of the program, provide cleanup funds, provide grants for in markets and things like that. But it doesn't go actually to pay for the recycling of the tires. It's that private fee you charge at the retailer that actually pays companies like us to recycle the tires. And retailers set those fees on their own. So I know I've confirmed in Florida, the lowest we've seen is a private retailer fee of $1 per tire. I think the highest we've seen is $4 per tire. The retailers just have a lot of flexibilities to sort of set that. Part of it is market dynamics, right? Nobody wants to get higher than their competition, so people will go somewhere else. Part of it is what are the values that that retailer has? Some retailers will say, I want every single tire that we in scrap tire that we produce to go to a recycled use guaranteed. And we will provide that service for them. But if we're guaranteeing it, it'll cost a little more than if they say, I want whatever the cheapest price is, which might mean some go to disposal. So I'm happy to jump back to this, but that's really just the most important thing from this. So, what are the challenges and developments at the state level then if tires are governed at the state level? So, I like to say every state is unique, but they're all facing similar challenges on this. Broadly speaking, most of these laws were passed before tire recycling as an industry really existed. That 1 billion tire number I mentioned, what states really wanted to do was say, let's get these tires off the ground. They're breeding homes for mosquitoes, snakes, rats. And if they catch fire, they're impossible to put off. So let's just get them into landfills as quickly as as quick as possible as we can. So most laws were optimized for tires just to go into some legal form of disposal. So that's number one and number two. Number three is I mentioned that eco fee, including Florida, that Florida collects. Most states collect a small fee that could go a long way to increasing the amount of tires recycled or to reimbursing counties and cities for cleanup costs or providing grants. But the overwhelming amount is diverted to non-related and truly non-recycling programs. Unfortunately, I'd say this is one area of pure bipartisan support. Is I have two states highlighted on a slide up here. One is Florida and one is Washington State. So, a state, overwhelmingly controlled by Republicans versus overwhelmingly controlled by Democrats. They equally divert their funds. Most state fees have rarely been adjusted. That $1 a tire is the most typical fee that is set in states. Some do charge a little more, some charge a little less. Very few of those fees have changed since 1991. I don't think I have to tell anybody that a dollar in 1991 went a lot further than a dollar today. And then finally, the other thing is again, because many of these programs, including fees, bonding requirements, all that sort of stuff were set in 1991. So the barrier to entry to get into tire recycling is really low, which sounds like a good thing until you realize how complicated and difficult it is to do right. And it means that a lot of people, best case scenario, get in, realize they're in over their head, realize the only way for them to make money is to do things illegally. Worst case scenario is you have people who will just hop around and game the system because even if they get caught, most of the time they're talking about a $500 fee and they can make a lot more money in the interim before they ever get caught. So what are the main sources of illegal dumping? So some would be, individuals, I say at-home mechanics. I think the impact of this is probably pretty low. Most people get their tires changed at a retailer. Most people don't take their old tires back from the retailer. But it does happen, and we've heard reports, particularly somebody, either changes their tires at home or takes their old tires, not realizing when they do decide that they actually aren't going to use them for anything, they're going to have to pay to dispose of them. Most places they can't just take them to dispose for free, so they either just store them or they dump them somewhere. Um, the middle one, low end haulers, tire haulers, this is where it is the by far the biggest impact in the system for illegal dumping. Is again in Florida, I'll go through this. It's basically a 25 or sorry, $35 fee and a driver's license to get a registration as a tire hauler. You don't have to show a disposal plan. You don't have to show legal markets. You don't have to show financial assurance, insurance, or anything like that. So you can get into the business as long as you have a truck. And often what will happen is to get tires, to get paid to collect tires, they will go in and collect them at a fee that's below the market rate, but then they can't dispose of them at that fee. So they'll either rent property or have property where they store them until it gets full, and then they'll move on to another piece. Or the worst case, I mean, that's not a great scenario. Or the worst case scenario is they just find a place where they're not going to get caught, push them off the truck, and then repeat and keep getting paid. And they're making money because they're not paying for recycling or disposal. And then finally, the other one is, and I will say I put unknown on this one because I've had a hard time, and I talked to a lot of states about this, tracking down the exact impact, but it's used tire shops. And I don't want to paint them all the same brush, but I would say the ones that you really want to take a look at are the sort of operations, that we call cash only operations, ones that probably don't have a occupancy license, they don't have a business license, and they're operating on really low margins under the radar. And so they're probably not paying the disposal fee, and they're definitely not hiring haulers and making sure those haulers are taking tires to legal destinations. But the good news is, at every single point of the stage, illegal dumping can be targeted. And I'm happy to go back to this. And I would say for me, there's two main aspects of cutting off illegal dumping, right? Is you do have to clean up tires when they're dumped illegally, but you don't want to create a system where the incentive is for people to just dump them and then the state or local governments have to pay to clean them up. So what you want to do is tighten that system at the top and make it as good as possible so there's very little leakage. Increase incentives for markets for recycled products so that there's actually more value in tires to end up in a recycled destination instead of dumped or disposed. And then use any other funds in the system to clean up tires so that sites don't become dumping grounds, because they do tend, this is, sort of the broken windows theory, where, once one place ends up getting dumped and it doesn't get cleaned up, it ends up attracting other dumps or other litter along the way. Let's see. Sorry. Third question. Let's see. Oh, okay, great. All right. There we go. And like I said, in a goodly operated system or a well-designed system, those fees, which you'd be surprised how far, a dollar a tire can go, but in a state like Florida, you're talking over $20 million a year, when applied properly, can go to incentivizing recycling, which again makes those tires more valuable and more likely to end up in a recycled destination. One thing I should say, this is probably a little bit too much, all of this is too much information, but um, is one of the misunderstood things about tire recycling is people ask, well, why are tires being dumped when you can sell them as a recycled product? Aren't you making money? The worst kept secret is most tire recyclers actually lose money on the recycled product. We actually create end markets for our recycled products, hopefully to break even, but as a destination for that recycled material so that it doesn't end up in a landfill. So this is why a little bit of incentive on that side can change the economics and actually turn those into a money-making enterprise instead of just a break-even enterprise. So here's a quick case study on Florida of what does a processor, somebody who's granulating tires, look like versus a hauler. And I would say briefly speaking, not if we have an ask, our ask to the state of Florida would essentially be tire haulers are touching just as many tires in the system as processors are, right? By definition. So our ask would be take the requirements for processors and apply those to haulers since they're in the same business. So processors have extensive permitting requirements, which includes waste disposal, plans for closures of the facility. If you're familiar with like landfill closure plans, it's the same thing. You both have to have a plan, quotes, financial assurance, maximum storage rule, processing quotas so you're not building up too many tires on site, and then strict record keeping requirements and submissions to Florida DEP. Haulers in Florida have a $35 fee. You have to display a decal, record keeping that's not submitted to the state, no disposal plan, no storage plan, no financial assurance. So this is where that challenge in the system comes. Again, a case study is, and this is one, you don't find many things in industry where virtually everyone agrees, but this is called a manifest system. Most states, Florida does not, unfortunately, but I think about 36 states have tire manifest systems. Most of those are paper. I would say, paper is a good starting place, but it is 2025. We should be talking about an electronic manifest system. You can see on the left, this is a real paper manifest system from Texas. I've talked to regulators around the country, one of which has told me a significant portion of their staff time is spent just trying to interpret handwriting on paper manifest systems. And obviously, if you can't even read the manifest, it doesn't do a whole lot when it comes to accountability to be able to say, okay, a retailer sent this person this many tires, the hauler picked up this many, the processor got this many. If tires disappeared in that system, like who's responsible? You can't do that if you're not even reading the records. So I would say electronic manifest is the way to go, the way of the future, probably the way of 15 years ago, but we are where we are. Diversion of tire funds. I said, unfortunately, this is a bipartisan activity. Washington State collects about $37 million in tire funds. They only spend 2% on tire related activities. Florida's a little better, about $27 million, 9% on tire activities. But you can see, you know, most, in the grand scheme of the state budget, not a whole lot of money. But particularly if you're talking about grants for amnesty days, for cleanups, for local governments, for in-market developments, it wouldn't take that much of that money to actually make a pretty big difference. And I'm happy at the end to talk about Georgia's system isn't perfect, but I think from a local government perspective, it's about the best system I've seen in the country, and I'm happy to talk about what they do there. So despite all this doom and gloom, a lot of progress has actually been made. And what I really love about this issue is that, you know, it's an environmental issue, but it's not a partisan issue. We've made real progress in very blue states and very red states. I live in Maryland. They just raised their tire fee for the first time ever since 1988 last year. I'm in a tire working group here. North Carolina was diverting about a third of their tire fees, about $10 million a year, away from it. Literally last month, we got a bill signed by the governor bringing that money back. South Carolina overhauled their program. Georgia had a lockbox, so funds from their program can't be diverted. Tennessee's putting in place those manifest and hauler requirements I discussed. Iowa did the same thing. Colorado's overhauling their program. California's implementing electronic manifest. So there's a lot going on for what is still, at the end of the day, a relatively small industry, and we're making progress. So health and safety. I do want to take this head on. I often find that if I don't talk about health and safety, what I find out later is people really had it in the back of their mind, and I should just address it head on. So you have probably seen something like this on social media, online, and news reports. So what I should say is one use of recycled rubber is crumb rubber in synthetic turf fields. Crumb rubber both provides shock prevention, so think concussion protection, and also keeps the blades in synthetic turf grass standing up so that there's better performance on the field. About a decade ago, a coach from Washington, University of Washington, made a claim that it was associated with cancer. It got a lot of attention because ESPN ran a story on it. But what didn't get as much attention, and I would say just for general reasons of, the old adage of it bleeds, it leads, it's a lot more exciting to drive eyeballs and to drive clicks by saying, it's like something terrible is happening rather than a story that says everything's fine. Washington State did a study on very specifically this claim itself that they put out within a couple of years. And they actually said not only was there no there, but actually the rates of cancer among soccer players, specifically players on that list that the coach produced, were actually lower than the peer groups for other kids that age in Washington State. And so Washington State itself said it doesn't matter what type of field you want to play on, it's better to go out and play. There's no evidence that this causes cancer. That didn't quite solve it. Actually, my old boss, Senator Bill Nelson, along with Richard Blumenthal, made a request from the EPA to investigate it. I will say, like so many things, because of COVID, it took a lot longer than everybody thought it was going to be. But they released their final study last year, April of last year, which was an exposure study. So what that said was, let's look at players who play only on grass fields, only on turf fields with crumb rubber, and ones who play at both. And they actually measured their sweat, their urine, and took blood samples to look at, do they have any more exposure to metals or toxins or PAHs or PFAS or anything like that? And they came back and said the answer is no. That players, their biomarkers look the exact same in both of them. But it's not just that. New York State, New York City, Connecticut, Netherlands, the Dutch National Health System, European Chemical Health Agency, an Italian study. I should say these are all non-industry studies. They're all government studies. The one that really is important came out this year. So one of the sort of criticisms that we kept hearing was, okay, these are great, but they're not actually risk assessments. You're looking at exposure. You're saying there's no difference between players on turf fields with crumb rubber versus grass fields, but that's not a risk assessment. So California conducted a study that was actually done over 10 years, started in 2015, by the California EPA, specifically their Office of Environmental Health and Human Assessment, OEHA. And they looked at not only risk assessment, but they went beyond cancer. They looked at skin irritation, asthma, reproductive health, and they didn't just look at players, they looked at anybody who might be on a field and exposed to it. Spectators, coaches, referees, players, subset of goalies, and then they cross-referenced it and broke them out into different age demographics too, looking at kids as young as 2 years old and people up to 70 years old. And they specified they did this under the worst case possible conditions, and what they found was there was no difference in their risk assessment across all of these measures that they looked at. So that was released in draft form in April. They took public comment, and we expect the final report of that to come out later this year. All right. So jumping into what I think is the fun stuff, recycled rubber markets. I've covered part of this. 19% to landfill. I think the easiest way to think about this is everything except for the light green, the landfill, and the TDF in light blue, that's all material recovery. So energy recovery, tire derived fuel is about 1/3, landfill is about 1/5, and the rest is material recovery going into some form of infrastructure or product.
What is
So
sorry, Strawn, what is
yes,
TDF?
tire derived fuel. It's a lovely industry term. So burning tires bad, tire derived fuel, burned in a controlled boiler with air emissions and scrubbers, okay. I think for most people, they would say it's not their preferred outlet, but in the US in particular, the reality is if there wasn't tire derived fuel right now, you would have more going to landfill disposal. So if you think of that hierarchy of waste, it's above landfilling, but at the bottom of the hierarchy of waste. So these are the ground rubber applications. These are some products we make ourselves, but I will go into other products as well. Parking stops. I know I've actually been to a bunch of the Florida state parks that now use these in their parking lots. Rubber mulch, rubber running surfaces, lots of lawn and guard applications, rubber tiling. And then in the bottom left, rubber modified asphalt, which I could spend a whole nother presentation on. But rubber modified asphalt is super cool because you're not actually replacing in the version of rubber modified asphalt that is most popular now, you're not actually replacing the aggregate in it. You're actually using rubber as a polymer instead of a polymer binder. So you're creating an additive in the asphalt that makes it better. So it makes it more flexible, so it's less likely to crack, less likely to rut, and it extends the life of the pavement 35%. And that's, again, not us, that's academic numbers, where I've talked to one of the leading professors who studied this, and I said, what is the most conservative number I should use? And he said, extends the life of the pavement by 35%. And what I find particularly cool about it is it actually, because it increases the flexibility of asphalt, it allows you to put more reclaimed asphalt back into the asphalt mix too. So you're not only finding a home for tires, but you're also putting more reclaimed asphalt back into the roads as well, extending the life even more. But the other big thing is I mentioned crumb rubber, which just means granulated rubber, is a feedstock. So actually, the facility that y'all toured in Port St. Lucie, a lot of that material, when it's reduced into crumb rubber, which again just means small little bits of rubber, is actually sent up to Northwest Georgia, in Dalton, Georgia, where if you've ever bought a home mat, well, welcome mat, anywhere in a Target, Walmart, Tractor Supply, anywhere in the United States, it was probably made in Northwest Georgia with our recycled rubber from our facilities there and our facility in Florida. Because that entire bottom part, I think, is 99% recycled material. Any commercial gym flooring, increasingly, we're using it in construction materials, in asphalt modified um, shingles. And then the one I really love, and these are only used in residential right now, but we're in the discussion with some state DOTs to pilot them in the states, is for sound barriers because the rubber is lighter than a concrete sound barrier, so it's easy to put up, but rubber also absorbs sound better than concrete, so it actually lowers decibels more than concrete barriers if you think about applications on highways and homes near highways. Tire derived fuel, I don't want to just write it off. So, this is actually according to the state of Washington. Again, I'm trying to always cite outside materials. So, they looked at what are the emission savings from tire derived fuel because it normally replaces coal and petroleum coke. It's primarily used only in cement kilns and pulp and paper plants. And they found material recovery has the greatest emission savings, but you still get a really big emission savings with tire derived fuel. Walmart, so I'm just going to highlight Walmart real quick because I think it's one of the coolest stories. If you think about, you know, people love to throw around the term circularity, but circularity because we collect tires from almost every Walmart tire center in the US. Right now, about 25% of those tires we collect nationwide, we actually find homes back in Walmarts for that rubber from the tires that they generate. So we're helping them to get to a lower waste profile by finding markets for the material in their stores. And increasingly, we're hoping to find more material, or sorry, more home for materials in their not for sale products. So we did a rubber modified asphalt paving project for one of their stores in Missouri that they're doing as a pilot to see if they should do that and replicate it at their stores across the US. This one I highlighted just because it's one of my favorite stories. There used to be sort of counterintuitively to the ethos of bike riding. There used to be no way to effectively recycle bike tires at scale. We launched a partnership last year with Trek Bikes, where any Trek-owned store in the U.S. you can take bike tires in there and recycle them for free now. But again, just the highlight of when you have a willing partner, there's almost always a solution, even working through all the complications of logistics, cost, scale that you can figure out. Other thoughts, I mentioned local governments. I think the key to any good system is that local governments should be getting funding. Again, even if you manage 99% of tires effectively and they get to a proper destination, disposal location, that 1% still represents hundreds of thousands of tires that don't. So at the end of the day, you still have to have some money going to local governments to clean up tires or to host amnesty days to make sure those are getting back into the system. I think the industry does have a responsibility to innovate on our side. So one criticism that I think is fair is anybody who's played on a synthetic turf field will know that some of those crumb rubber bits stick to your shoes, stick to your socks and your skin and come home with you. So is there a microplastic issue? So us, along with a few other companies, have actually paid for demonstration fields. This was piloted in Europe, but now we have fields in New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, and I think we're looking maybe California, and we're looking to fund a couple in the Midwest of what is like just off the shelf technology in terms of grates, barriers, brushes that you can use to reduce the amount of infill leaving a field so it stays where it belongs. And the testing out of Europe shows that they had a system of fields. It was actually 3 fields where they had, I think, 180 games on every field throughout the year. So over what 400 and something, 480 throughout the year. And they ended up reducing the amount of crumb rubber that came off of that field to, I think, 14 pounds. So something that was almost negligible in terms of leaving the field when compared to the access that it provided for play. And then finally, what I would say is if you're looking for more information, recyclerubbercoalition.org or betterplaytoday.org. These are industry funded websites, but what I will say is we lean very heavily on academic research, government funded research, not industry research. The only difference is Recycle Rubber Coalition tends to be a little wonkier. Like we wrote a white paper looking at what's the impact of EVs on tire recycling in the US because they go through tires much faster than traditional vehicles. Whereas Better Play Today focuses where on most of us interact with recycled rubber, being playgrounds, fields, and things like that. And it's more at a consumer level for people who want that confidence, want to know that the science is there, but they're not necessarily interested in all of the wonky details on it. So, with that, I went over the time I said I was going to talk, but I will stop and I'm more than happy to have questions. Or if I have given you more than you've ever wanted to know, I will consider that a victory.
Thank you, Stratton. That was really great. I'm gonna open it up because I you talked about so much, which I think is really awesome. And I really appreciate you going into the science behind it. I know I warned you that our affiliates would 100% be asking those questions. And I think it's really important for us as people in the industry to have a better understanding of, how it's going to be affected. Kaylee, if you'll call on people, I have to go find my charger for my laptop because it's about to die. So thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions for Stratton? You can raise your hand on here, or you can just unmute yourself, or put it in the chat if you don't want to talk.
This is Gene Jones. I've got a quick question. Stratton, can you drop in your contact information in the chat?
Absolutely.
That'd be great. That was a great talk. I got a lot out of that. Thank you.
In Stratton, I don't know if you know Gene, but Gene is the CEO, executive director of SWIX, which is the Southwest Information Exchange, and
Okay.
he educates people all throughout the Southwest region of the US on how to recycle hard to recycle items.
Okay.
So he's a great person to be connected with for sure.
Okay. Great.
And then
Let's
we
see.
have a question from Kenneth. He says, have you seen land development regulations or other regulatory mechanisms helpful in combating this issue?
So I don't know about land development regulations, but what I will say is, um, one, the best recommendation that Florida does have on the books, but obviously isn't very effective, is allowing criminal charges to be brought for illegal dumping. You have to have people who are willing to enforce that. But what I will say where I have seen some innovation in the system is in Alabama. They just passed a bill this year where they have devolved, and I know devolving to the local level isn't necessarily the most popular thing in the Florida legislature, but they have devolved the authority to, I think for them, it's class size two cities. But so it's basically cities around the size of Mobile to do criminal enforcement for illegal dumping and to pull over tire haulers to verify that they have a permit with the state as well. That used to only be allowed by ADEM, their version of DEP, and I think maybe their state highway patrol, but now they're letting county and city officials do that enforcement as well so they can focus on enforcement at the local level to prevent illegal dumping.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm with Keep County Beautiful. We host anywhere from 4 to 10 public tire recycling events every year. This last year, we collected a little under 11,000 tires for proper recycling here in the county. So we work very closely with our law enforcement, with our county's code enforcement, and we're a nonprofit. So we're definitely always wanting to find out new ways to recycle. Where are we sending our tires? And I think a good portion came to you guys through our landfill. And now we have a brand new tire facility in Polk County that is shredding and processing tires now.
Okay.
So I will say, for questions about like law enforcement, I've been doing a really deep dive because there seems to be a breakdown. Like our law enforcement can go and do tire shop inspections.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the tire shop has to prove, hey, yes, we hired a licensed tire hauler. But like you said in the beginning, for $35, you can become a licensed tire hauler. And it's harder to follow those guys and find out where they took the tires because
Yeah, they're not required to tell anybody where they take the tires.
they're not required, but they are. What I just found out yesterday, I had like a 4-hour conversation, this poor deputy, uh, about tires, is that they are required to keep a log
Yeah,
by he requires them to do that. And if there's probable cause, they will have to show that log. So we're trying to work with our local environmental crimes to see if we can do some kind of initiative that holds those smaller tire haulers
yeah,
accountable. Because like you said, that's where we're seeing the majority of our dumping, and Polk County is very rural. So we have huge dump sites all
yeah.
over tires. But I can, if anybody wants to know those tire laws that we have here in Florida, I can send those statutes later in an email to Sherry, and you can share it with everybody along with this webinar, just in case people are wanting to know, to take it back to their local law enforcement and say, hey, we know that there's a law in Florida that's supposed to enforce this and help with this. What can we do to make sure we're doing our part in our counties?
Yep, absolutely.
And then just a
Um,
reminder for everyone too, FWC will also help if there's dumping in any like near
yeah,
waterways or on lands. FWC can handle that as well as regular law enforcement.
yep. No, and I've actually talked to some of the, I think at the actually Keep America Beautiful National Conference, there were some of their representatives there who had talked to about that as well. I will say one of the things I mentioned was bonding requirement for haulers, and I will give both a real world example, but then also sort of an underappreciated private sector regulation that kicks in with it. So, I mean, right now, Florida doesn't have any bonding requirement, but the states that do, they were set in, again, 88, 91. It tends to be around $10,000. You can go online and get a tire bonding requirement, I think in probably less than 7 minutes. I've done it before just for fun. Because at $10,000, they're essentially playing, the companies that are running these bonding companies are playing a game of scale, right? They're not investigating every business that's getting a $10,000 bond to make sure they're a legitimate business. In Iowa, which set the bonding requirement for haulers at the highest level of any state in the country at 150,000, what they found is when you set that number high enough, and I think there's a fair debate of is 150 too high or can you get it lower but still have this um, private sector mechanism kicks in, what happens is that bonding company isn't automatically approving people who are applying for bonds, right? Even if the state doesn't have a requirement for them to prove legal disposal in a business plan, that company that is bonding or providing financial assurance for that does ask for it because they don't want to provide that bond for a company that's going to get caught and then they're going to be on the hook for paying that bond out. And so in Iowa, again, it's smaller state, but I think it's illustrative because, you know, a very conservative state in terms of its state politics as well. What they found was when they put this into place, they only lost 2 tire haulers. And they have said, we're happy to talk to anybody, but our illegal dumping problem virtually disappeared after we put that bonding requirement in place because there was only a small amount of companies that were the low end operators, but they were causing the majority of our problems when it came to illegal dumping. And really, what they put in place was just that bonding requirement. They didn't put in any other regulations. I don't even think they are, sorry, not think. I know they didn't do an electronic manifest, which I still think they should do. But again, you know, just proof that, you know, some experimentation in the system can have some really big impacts and still be something that's politically acceptable in a lot of states.
Great, thank you. Who else has questions or comments? Anyone? Rhonda mentioned that her mosquito control division also assists with tire dumps. That's also a really great point because they want to get rid of them for a different reason, but still getting rid of them. So that's really great. Um, I want to note that if anyone, I did take Megan came with me. I did take a few people over to the Port St. Lucie tire facility that I mentioned at the beginning. And, I can connect you or Stratton can connect you with someone over there if anyone wants to drive over there and do a tour. They also have, which I think is really cool, they send a lot of their mulch up to Live Oak, if I'm
Mhm.
correct, Stratton.
Live Oak.
Okay. And they have the mulch facility in Live Oak, and that's where they like dye it all or paint it for the different colors. And I'm hoping to do a tour of that one. And I'm interested, Katie, have you toured your facility that you said you guys have locally now in Polk County?
So I haven't seen his shredder at work, but
Uh-huh.
it's Scrap It is the name of the company. And he sits on my board of directors.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, I've been to his facility multiple times. They donate the hauling for some of our tire recycling events. So I've worked really closely with him for years. But I haven't gotten to see his new tire shredder at work, but it's on the books for next week. So I'm super excited.
Good. Yeah, I definitely think even if it's not a Liberty Tire facility, if you have a local tire facility in your area, I really believe it's worth going and taking a look. I learned so much on my tour, and I thought it was just really great. Something that I thought was really awesome was that they what how it works is when the tires come on the conveyor belt, they have staff that are hand sorting the tires to start, and they look at the tires to see if there's actually resale value in them first. So instead of just assuming, all right, we're just recycling everything that comes into the facility, they're taking a look and saying, actually, this tire has another, I don't know, 10,000 miles on it. I don't know how long tires last, to be honest, so I'm not sure if that's a lot or not. Um,
It's
but
normally
they just,
they look at the tread depth.
yes, they look at the
Yep.
tread depth and they decide like the quality of the tire. And I think that's really great. So they're not just automatically recycling everything that comes in, they're reusing. And then they also recycle and resell the what are the center things in the tire? The metal things?
The
The
tread weights.
rims.
The rims. Thank you, Kaylee.
Yeah.
So they also resell the rims. During the tour, they were telling me that, Tesla rims, for whatever reason, are reselling for a really high value. So, they are reusing a lot of the material, and then the weights in the tires get separated out. And the
Tires are
metal,
also, yeah, tires are depending on the tire between 12 to 21% steel wire.
yeah,
And
so
so
this steel
mhm.
wire gets remade into rebarb mostly is what I gathered from it. So I know that we talked a lot about like recycling, tire recycling in the US and whatnot, but really learning about the start to finish of how they're created, I think, or of how they're recycled, and I just think it's really fascinating, and I do highly recommend everyone if you have a chance to do it. So yeah, that's just my take on it. Let's see what else we got. Um, Kenneth,
What, go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I mentioned I would just say real quick, Georgia's program. Again, it's not
Yeah.
perfect, but the aspect I love about Georgia's program, which I assume most of y'all will love, given that you're on the front lines of dealing with it, is so they passed a constitutional amendment, I think in 2020, requiring state fees to go back to their intended uses. Now, not all of their tire fee goes to tire recycling. A big portion of it goes to support curbside recycling, but the portion that does only goes to local governments, which we're good with. But one portion is grants. So if you want to do playgrounds, tracks, rubber modified asphalt is a really big popular one. Counties and cities qualify for grants that they can apply for every year. But the one that I think is really crucial is every single county in every single municipality in Georgia qualifies for up to $75,000 in reimbursement for amnesty and cleanups every single year. And it's like, again, the system should be we get as few tires from going on the ground illegally as they can. But it's a great system because it means most of the time in Georgia now, and we do a lot of cleanups, I should say, too, and run amnesty days. When we're dealing with tire piles in Georgia, we're talking worst case scenario, a couple hundred, oftentimes like 50. It's like because they're able to clean these up so frequently and have a relatively good system in terms of keeping them off the ground in the first place, is, the amount of tires that we're actually cleaning up in illegal dumps is really small compared to other states. And then counties and municipalities can use that money just to run their free amnesty days instead of cleanups going forward.
I think that's great. Um, if there's, I know that a couple of our affiliates really don't have a lot of recycling support in their areas. If they were interested in doing like an amnesty day, but the city or the county, they didn't have a ton of support, is there like a service you could, or like a more local place that you could connect them with where they could potentially meet up with and recycle through them? Is that possible? So like Lynn, she is with Franklin County. And Lynn, I don't know if you
I
are,
grew up in
I
Wakulla,
see.
so I know Franklin well.
Yeah, okay, great. So like Lynn is really struggling with the city and the county and how there's just really not a lot of recycling, and she's thinking of outside of the box ways to recycle. So she's doing like some innovative glass stuff. And I'm wondering, Lynn, do you guys have any kind of tire recycling in Franklin? She must have popped off. Never mind. We'll circle back. I'll see what she says.
Well, what I would say is if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If I'm not the right person, I can connect you with some of our local team on the ground in Florida. And
Perfect.
I will say they're very good about if it is, so we either serve, so we cover all 50 states. So we either service an area, or if we don't have drivers directly in it, we'll have relationships with other companies, subcontractors to service. So what I would say is if we're not the right person, we're not in that geography, we will at least know somebody who is a high quality company that you can do business with, that you have assurance is going to be taking tires to the right place and not dumping them or storing them illegally. And we're always happy to make those connections.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Stratton before we let him go? Chris Perry, he's on the line as well. He's with DEP. For those of you that haven't met him, he put a link for their tire amnesty program initiative. If you'd like to take a look at that or need help with that. Oh, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. Yeah, I sure did. Anyone looking to just acquire a tire amnesty packet, it includes registration information, scope of work template, checklist, participation log sheet, just anything that you would really need to create a tire amnesty event, as well as just links and resources to getting funding as well, since state of Florida does offer up to $25,000 per calendar year to go towards an event such as that.
That's great. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. That's really fantastic. Is that $25,000? Is that like per municipality or what is that?
Yeah, well, it's per county, and it can also an entity within a county is eligible for it through the county grant, but it's it can go towards equipment rental, towards hauling, and any other things that you need for that event.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you for
Sure.
being here as well.
Oh, no problem.
Anyone else have any questions or comments they'd like to add before we let everyone go?
Yes, Kenneth here, North Miami. Our waste management providers, Waste Pro. What questions should I be have ready prior to speaking to them?
I mean, you can ask them who their tires go to and if they're recycled or they're landfilled, because they should know that.
Awesome.
I have one more question, Sherry. For
Go ahead.
the Department of Environmental Protection, is it for only counties or can I apply for a municipality?
So Chris,
Yeah, you
Sarah's with
can.
Winter Park.
Yeah, you can apply as a municipality.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
And Sarah, if you want, shoot me an email and I'll share Chris's email with you if you have questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope you had a good vacation. I feel like you were on vacation for a
I
couple weeks.
was. 2
Good.
weeks. Yeah. I went to
Good.
Seattle. It was awesome.
Good for you. I'm glad to hear that.
Thanks.
All right. Well, it is 2 o'clock, so I'm gonna let everyone go. Thank you everyone for being here. Stratton, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being here. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday weekend. Get some rest. And also, real quick, if you haven't registered for the conference in November, please do so. We hope to see you all there. And if you need help paying for anything, please reach out to me. I'm sure we can help you get there. All right. You guys have a great day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.